I'll just say a few words about the Rambam and about this particular work of his. The Rambam was a systematic thinker, and he organized and systematized the Torah in uniquely original ways. No one before him or after him did anything remotely resembling what he did. He took the entire oral tradition, which was recorded in the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, and the works of the Gaonim that came before him, and organized it into a work of the Mishnah Torah of 14 main sections and then many minor sections and subsections. He rendered decisions on matters of Jewish law in all areas, all subjects, including subjects that weren't practiced in his day. His criterion for rendering decisions was what is going to be practiced at the time of the Mashiach, which means all of the sacrifices and all of the matters of purity, the king and the Sanhedrin, and war and peace, and all of them he analyzed and organized. Of course, at the end of his life, he wrote the Guide of the Perplexed, which is the major philosophical work of Judaism altogether. The first major work that he produced is his commentary in the Mishnah. The commentary in the Mishnah was written in Arabic, meaning it was not written for the scholars who would communicate in Hebrew, but for the common people. And in it he has many systematic introductions to topics, meaning he's not presuming that his reader is familiar with even the basic ideas. So he explains them. And in the introduction to Perek Helek at the end of Sanhedrin, he, as a survey of certain very basic fundamental ideas of the Torah, and it ends with the 13 principles of what are called faith, 13 principles of commitment, which have become famous. They're printed in the Siddur at the end of Shachris. The Ani Mamins, which come from him. They come from this work of his. So this work in terms of reward and punishment, and the prophecy of Moses, and the eternal nature of the Torah, and so forth and so on, and it covers a great many very important subjects. The commentary in the Mishnah, although it's the commentary in the Mishnah, even though it's very early, is something that he worked on for his whole life. He revised it throughout his lifetime. And therefore, it's very important, if you're going to study it, to have the last manuscript. Now, I picked this English translation only because it was easily available. I didn't see any notes on where it was taken from. I have the last edition here in Hebrew in front of me. To the extent that in this particular section, in the last edition, he says, I'm explaining this to you as I explained in my book, The Morah, the Guide of the Perplexed. So in that last edition, last editing of the commentary on the Mishnah, he had already written the Guide of the Perplexed, which he wrote at the end of his life. So he was revising it his whole life. And it's very important to know, if you're going to study any passage in the commentary in the Mishnah, for example, the commentary in the Mishnah that's printed in the back of each Masechta in the Shas isn't the final edition of the commentary in the Mishnah, unless there are new editions of Shas which have changed the manuscript. So yeah, if you're going to look it up, it's worthwhile to get hold of the last edition. You can get that either from the Ma'or 7-volume production of the commentary of the Mishnah of the Rambam, which I have here, Rabbi Kapach also, when he did his translation, used the last edition. For example, if you compare the Rambam's 13 principles of so-called faith as they appear in the commentary of the Mishnah versus what's written in the Siddur, as far as I know, we don't know who wrote the ones in the Siddur. If you use an earlier edition of the commentary in the Mishnah, it doesn't fit so well with what's written in the Siddur. When I was not aware that there were different editions of the commentary of the Mishnah, I thought to myself, well, what's written in the Siddur doesn't agree so well with what's written in the commentary of the Mishnah. Well, who knows who the author was of the ones in the Siddur? And maybe he just wasn't very careful. But then when I found out that there are the different editions, and I looked at what's written in the Siddur compared to the latest edition of the commentary of the Mishnah, it fits very well. So obviously, whoever he was had the latest edition. He did it with respect to that. That's important to know. And therefore, there's a certain resistance to saying, well, this is what he wrote in the commentary in the Mishnah, and this is what he wrote in the Mishnah Torah, and this is what he wrote in the Guide of the Perplexed, and the later Sefer takes precedence over the earlier Sefer. There's a resistance to saying that because, number one, he was a systematic thinker, and number two, if you have the latest edition of the commentary in the Mishnah, that represents his thought after he finished writing the Moreh Nevuchim. So he didn't change his mind from that. So one shouldn't just facilely assume that there are contradictions between the books because his thought developed over time, and you should pick the latter over the former. Sometimes you can come to that conclusion, but one shouldn't just facilely assume that that's the case. Okay, so now he starts here. Now I'm going to change my glasses so I can see what I'm doing. Yeah.
So in terms of the previous editions of the commentary in the Mishnah, I mean we're going to approach the latest edition, right? But there's something to rely on the previous editions in the case like to review some contrasts or like between the earlier editions and the latest edition. It's like something worth.
Not quite sure what you're asking. The earlier editions really are his. He really wrote them. Yes. So you could ask, why did he change his mind? Right. I mean, there are places where he crossed out whole pages. Mm-hmm. This edition of the Ma'or, in the beginning, has an introduction, like a 90-page introduction, where they have facsimiles of his actual writing, and places where he crossed things out or crossed out words or wrote extra things in. So they bring the Achronim who treat the Rambam as doing something systematic, and therefore, for example, they will ask when there seems to be a contradiction between, let's say, the commentary of the Mishnah and the Mishnah Torah, they will ask that it's a contradiction and try to reconcile it. They don't just assume he changed his mind, because they know he's a systematic thinker, but they bring one case where Rabbi Akiva Eiger does that, and they point out that in the later editions of the commentary of the Mishnah, the Rambam changed his mind. So it really was a contradiction. And he changed his mind in favor of what he wrote in the Mishnah Torah. So that's why I say you don't just assume that the later one is different from the prior one, but it could happen. And so then you can learn from the earlier to the later that really did change his mind. That you definitely could learn. Okay, now it starts with this Mishnah itself. So let me read to you the Hebrew of the Mishnah. Sorry, that's before this. This edition has a lot of footnotes of the literature, secondary literature on the Rambam. So it starts off with the famous phrase that everybody knows because they read Pirkei Avos, Kol Yisrael yesh lehem Helek la'olam haba. Every Jew has a portion in the world to come. Shneamar ve'amech kulam tzadikim. Your people are all righteous. Le'olam yirshu oretz. They will eternally inherit the land. And of course, to eternally inherit the land doesn't mean, Tiberia or Beersheba. It means the world to come. So you read that, and you hear every Jew has a portion, and so forth and so on. Did I give you one? Did I give him one? No? No, here. Yeah. But the very next words are, Ve'elu she'ein lehem chelek olam haba. Aha. So everyone has, and these don't. That's interesting. So then, what does everyone has mean if these don't? So, one way of explaining it is this. Everyone has a portion of the world to come assigned to him, available to him. His name is on the door. But he could throw it away. He could throw it away. So if you live a normal life, a reasonable life, an acceptable life, you'll get it because that was your final address. But if you rebel too severely, then indeed you could lose it. Our tradition tells us that Yaakov, when Esav became wicked and led a life of dedicated evil, Yaakov inherited Esau's share in the world to come. So that tells you that even he had a share assigned to him, but the way he lived, he lost it. So it's not predetermined that you get a share in the world to come. It's possible to lose it. But it is the default, and that's worth something. So you have to do something to undo the set-up structure that you should have it. That's what the Mishnah is telling you. At least one way of explaining what the Mishnah is telling you. Now it says, who are the ones who don't have a share in the world to come? Ha'omer ein tchias hamesim. Now, here in other editions, the standard edition you have in your Mishnah in the Gemara is min Torah, and this makes a big difference. The question is, what is this person denying? Is the person denying that there will be a resurrection? Well, that you can understand. That's a fundamental principle of the Jewish religion, that there will be a resurrection. It's one of the 13 principles the Rambam will codify at the end. If he denies that, then he's stepped outside the basic elements of Jewish belief. And I'll tell you something now because there's a lot of misinformation about this, and when we see it inside the Rambam's commentary, we'll see it again. But we're not now talking about people who fail to believe. We're talking about people who reject. The difference is some people fail to believe because they never heard about it, never confronted it, they never knew it existed. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about somebody who rejects it. At the very end of this section, Rambam is going to talk about that. Rabbi Meiselman taught me. It says in the Mishnah Torah that this person is wicked. You're not wicked because you never heard of something. That doesn't make you wicked. You're not a Russia. So if you've heard the phrase Nebuch Apikoros, it's a mistake. It's wrong. If he's really a Nebuch, he can't be an Apikoros. Apikoros is only a person who heard about it, understood that it's normative Jewish teaching, and rejected it. Yeah.
What does it mean when it says it's not taught in the Torah? Does that mean that he says that it's not taught in the Torah?
Okay, I'm coming to that. First, I used the edition that's printed in this edition of the Rambam's copy of the Mishnah, and there it doesn't say Min Torah. But you have it printed in your Gemaras, and the standard one that we have in our Mishnah it says Min Torah, and then it's much more subtle. He says, yeah, for sure, there's going to be resurrection. I believe in all the 13 principles. I just don't believe it's written in the Torah. It's part of the oral tradition. There's no verse that testifies to it. Now that seems to be a much less serious mistake. So there is a verse, there isn't a verse. Is there a principle of Judaism that is written in the Torah? And according to that text, which you have, and which he brings here as an alternative text, yes, saying that it's from the Torah is what the Torah wants. And if you deny it's from the Torah, you've denied the principle entirely. And we'll come to that. Rashi has an explanation of that. We'll come to that. Ve'ein Torah min hashamayim. The Torah is the wisdom of Moses and the collective wisdom of the Jewish people, the sayings of great thinkers and so forth and so on, but it's not min hashamayim. That's true. That's another thing that he will not have a share in the world to come. Apikoros. Now, apikoros is a term that has many different meanings, and we'll see the Rambam's explanation of it. Some kind of denial of fundamental principles. Rabbi Kiva said, even someone who reads what's called external books, and we'll have to see what they are. Someone who uses an incantation to cure a wound. He uses that verse where Kadosh Baruch Hu promises that the sicknesses that he put on Egypt, he won't put on you. He uses that to cure the wound. Rabbi Shaul says, even someone who pronounces the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu according to the way the letters are written, he too will have no share in the world to come. Now, I hope you're appreciating that this is a gigantic variety. These things don't look like they're on the same level at all. They look like you would never classify them together as equally fundamental and equally difficult transgressions. Okay, so that means this Mishnah needs a lot of work to be understood. Now, the Rambam goes through a long section of introduction to the general ideas, and then he will explain the Mishnah word for word, and then he will express the 13 principles of faith. We don't have a Gemara here, do we?
Yes, which one?
Brachos.
Brachos? Yes, 1 second.
Yeah, because I just want to read you one quote from the Rambam, which I think be important for people to know about the Rambam's attitude towards these things. Thank you very much. Where's the page Mishnah in here? Here we go. Okay. No, that's Mishnah. Here we go. It's the very end of Parish Mishnah is the end of Brachos. Where he talks about a few fundamentals of Jewish belief there. Maseches Avos. Okay, so he talks there about purposes of things. He says, "V'od neraber b'ktsas inyan hazeh b'Maseches Avos." Over there in Pirkei Avos, we'll also do v'arecha ktsas mei haskamas b'kiyah ha'pilosofim ledavar hakasuv kan b'chol inyanim. ואין זה מוקם להביא שם הדבר הוא. I wouldn't have spent the time on this. It's not really fitting for the place in which it's written. לולי אשר כיוונתי כשיבוא זכר דבר בעניין האמונה. But when anything is mentioned that has to do with our emuna, לבאר בו מעט כי יוקר בעיניי ללמוד ללמד עיקר מעיקרי הדס והאמונה יוסר מכל אשר אלמדהו. Because it's more precious to me to teach something about the fundamental beliefs of the Torah than anything else that I teach. The most precious thing that I teach is when I'm able to teach about the basic principles of Jewish belief. So, when people have all sorts of theories about who the Rambam was, what the Rambam meant, and what he cared about, was he a philosopher, wasn't he a philosopher, he tells you here the most precious thing in his opera, and therefore he'll bring it in, even though it isn't really necessary for the particular context in which it's written. To him, it's very precious to teach that. So that certainly applies to the section that we're going to study. Okay, so let's start reading it together, and we'll talk about it as best we can. I must speak now of the great fundamental principles of our faith. Know that the masters of the Torah hold differing opinions concerning the good which will come to a person as a result of fulfilling the commandments which God commanded us through Moses, our teacher. Okay, so the first thing he's talking about is reward. Reward. It's not obvious why that's the first thing he chooses to talk about. He says in the 10th chapter of the Laws of Repentance, and this sentiment is echoed by many, many Jewish thinkers, that ideally you should serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any thought of reward whatsoever. Yes, there will be a reward. It's one of our principles that you have to believe it. And he says you do it because it's necessary, it's right, and the good will come because Baruch Hu promises it. But that should be the purpose for which you do it. But here there is hidden, I think, a secret, and the place where you'll find it is in the first chapter of the Mesilas Yesharim, of the Path of the Just, by Lutzato. And I heard the idea on a tape from Yaakov Weinberg of Ner Yisrael, Zichrono Livracha, many, many years ago. Your motivation should be to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu unconditionally. That's what your motivation should be. But what's his motivation? Why did he create the world? Why did he set up the structure of mitzvos? What's his purpose? His purpose is that you should go to the world to come and get your reward. His purpose in doing the whole thing is to reward you. That's what he wants. Well, that's pretty important to know. That's his purpose in doing the whole thing. It's just that you have to keep clear that his purpose and my purpose can be different. I have to serve him because it's required, even if there weren't any reward at all. But as a matter of fact, his purpose is. So that's one reason why it'd be worthwhile to start with this discussion of what is the reward, because that's his purpose in creating the universe. Okay, so he says there are different opinions. As a consequence of their different understanding of the problem, they also hold widely different opinions concerning the evil which the transgressor suffers. Because after all, one definition of evil is lacking the things that are really good. And if you disagree about what things are really good, then you're automatically going to have a disagreement about what things are evil. That he has a whole section in the Moreh Nevuchim about that. So much confusion has invaded their opinions that it is almost impossible to find anyone whose opinion is uncontaminated by error, says the Rambam. The Rambam has no difficulty in making judgments. And he'll tell you, either you say that no one's uncontaminated by error because there's so many contradictions, and if you're fair, you'll say, well, sometimes this one got it right and sometimes that one got it right. You could then conclude that they all have mistakes somewhere. But he also has no difficulty in making his own judgments about who's right and who's wrong. So here we go. One group thinks that the expected good is the Garden of Eden. Now, what is that? Where is that? It's a place in which one eats and drinks without any physical work or effort. They also believe that their houses are made of precious stones, beds of silk, rivers flow with wine and fragrant oils, and many other things of that sort. So they think that the good is physical delight, physical pleasure. Unlike this world where there's pain and suffering and injury and illness and whatever pleasures you get, you have to work very hard for. There it's a physical heaven. This group believes that evil is Gehenna. Now, what is Gehenna? A place of raging fire. The very opposite. It's physical torment. But the whole thing is physical, in which bodies are burned and agonies of all sorts are inflicted upon men. The descriptions of these afflictions are told at great length, which cause fear, of course. This group produces proof for their opinions from the words of our sages and passages in Scripture, whose literal meaning seems either wholly or largely compatible with what they say. So, hint, hint, they're reading them literally. And that's why they derive support from it. But if the Rambam tells you they derive support because they're reading it literally, he's hinting that there are other ways to read it, and the other ways are preferable, and therefore the support is illusory. They're taking literally something which isn't meant to be read literally. That's group number one. Oh, they did it on two sides. I was wondering how they got by with so few pieces of paper. Yeah. Okay, next page. A second group asserts that the good for which we hope in the days of the Messiah, in whose time all men will be angels, and all of them will live forever. So this means not a special place called the Garden of Eden, somewhere in the Himalayan mountains or something. No, our world, but the nature of people and circumstance will change drastically in that time. Number one, there'll be no death. There'll be giants in stature, will grow in number and strength until they've occupied the entire world forever. That means this world will never stop. He didn't say that before. They also believe that in those days the earth will bring forth garments, woven, already ready to wear garments, baked bread, and many other impossible things. Many other impossible things. So Rambam is already hinting, it's not my view. In this view, the evil is, so if that's the great good, what's the evil? That a man may not be alive in those days and may not merit the privilege of seeing them. So here, evil is total absence. It's not the presence of something undesirable, it's simply missing out on the great value of what is desirable. That's also a shift. This group also produces proof for many statements found in the writings of our sages, for biblical verses, whose literal meaning seems to agree either wholly or partly with what they say. Now, since there's some overlap between the ideas, the Garden of Eden is a physical paradise, and this second group believes that the whole world will be something like a physical paradise, so you could easily see that there are verses which could apply to both of them and not distinguish between the two of them. So there could be verses that support both. That's the second view. A third group holds that the good for which we hope is the resurrection of the dead. none of this mentioned anybody dying, or what people have already died, the first two. It's just people will be there and they'll live under those conditions. By this they mean a man will live after his death and return to his family and dear ones and eat and drink and never die again. So the resurrection of the dead for them is restoring the prior condition that they had when they died. When they died, they left their surroundings and left their family, loved ones, and all that will be restored. According to this opinion, no, this must be a mistake. No, it's not the devil. There's an extra D here. There's probably a spell check. They wrote evil, they put in a D for devil. That's good. You have to question the spell check. The evil is that a man may not live after his death among those who are resurrected. So here again, the evil is missing out on the good, but not something positively undesirable like Gehenna was. So you see that the differences are not only differences in details, but the difference in structure. Here too, proof is deduced from many sayings that are found in the words of sages and biblical verses, whose literal meaning seem to teach this wholly or in part. Okay, so he has a formula, putting his limitations. A fourth view holds that the goal of fulfilling the commandments is the achievement of bodily peace and mundane success, like fertile lands, extensive possessions, many children, health, peace, and security. No change in the conditions of life whatsoever. Just doing very well. The first three believe that the world will change its character. No, it's just in the same environment, and they also believe that there will be a Jewish king who will rule over those who oppressed us. The evil that will overtake us if we deny the Torah is the opposite of these, as in our present exile. So now we're back to, like the first group, the evil is something positively undesirable. Rulership of others and exile and so forth and so on. Those who hold this opinion likewise find support for their views in verses of the Torah, particularly the curses and from other passages in Scripture. Now, we should just note that aside from maybe the third group, there's a little bit of a difficulty here. We're talking about the reward for keeping the mitzvos. Well, but let's say the Mashiach hasn't come yet. So what about all those people who lived and died before the Mashiach came? They kept mitzvos. When do they get their reward? Without the resurrection of the dead, it seems like the purpose isn't fulfilled. The same thing with Gan Eden. Doesn't speak about dead people going there. So all the people who die don't get it? I think there are loose ends here that these explanations haven't taken account of, just loose ends and details. A fifth group, and a large one, combines the opinion of all the others. They assert that the ultimate hope is that the Messiah will come, that he will resurrect the dead, who will enter the Garden of Eden, where they will eat and drink in perfect health forever. So you now have 5 views. If you have a question, you raise your hand. I'm using reading glasses, so I can't see you very clearly. So you have to make it clear to me that you want to ask a question of. However, concerning this strange world to come, you will rarely find anyone to whom it occurs to think about it seriously or adopt it as a fundamental doctrine of our faith, or to inquire what it really means, whether the world to come is the ultimate good, or whether some other possibility is. You have what you call the world to come. Maybe it's something else. Maybe you're not right about it. Nor does one often find persons who distinguish between the ultimate good itself and the means which lead to the ultimate good. If it's the mitzvos that do it, then the mitzvos themselves are only a means. They have no other purpose other than just a means to get to the ultimate good. What everybody wants to know, both the masses and the learned, is how the dead will rise. That's the thing that bothers them. That's the thing that occupies their thoughts, their imagination, their discussions. They want to know whether they will be naked or clothed, whether they will rise in the same shrouds in which they were buried, with the same embroidery, style, and beauty of sewing, or a plain garment which covers their bodies. Or they ask whether when the Messiah comes there will be rich men and poor men, weak men and strong men, and other similar questions. In other words, they get lost in the emotionally attractive details of the descriptions without asking the fundamental questions. You, however, who read this book thoughtfully, must understand the analogy which I'm about to draw for you. Prepare your mind to understand what I tell you about all this. Imagine a small child who has been brought to his teacher so that he may be taught the Torah, which is his ultimate good, because, these words are very important, it will bring him to perfection. This is brand new. It doesn't relate to anything he said up until now. You, as a creature, have certain capacities. Some of them are essential to you. When those capacities are realized, you reach your perfection. That means you have different states of being, and you can analyze and see that this state of being is inferior to that state of being. If you move from this one to that one, you've improved your position, your condition. And the purpose, he's telling me here, of being taught the Torah is so that when you live it, when you perform it, it will perfect you. Wow. That's a brand new idea. Initially completely divorced from the others, even though there are verses and statements in the sages which support the idea that in the future, those other things that the first 5 groups said will happen, but they aren't the real purpose. The real purpose is to perfect the individual. Now, that's the purpose of bringing the child to the teacher. However, because he's only a child and because his understanding is deficient, he does not grasp the true value of that good, nor does he understand the perfection which he can achieve by means of the Torah. He doesn't understand what the perfection is. He doesn't understand why it's valuable. So you can't say to him, it's like saying to a 6-year-old, you know, if you learn the aleph base the way I teach it to you, someday you'll be a doctor. Will I have cake tonight with supper? You know, will I be able to better to play soccer? Will I kick the ball better? Be a doctor? What does that mean to a 6-year-old? Oh, you mean the guy who sticks you with needles, makes people cry, nobody wants to go? I don't want to be a doctor. You're kidding. I would never want to do that. Doctors make people unhappy. Doctors cause people pain. What are you going to do to motivate the 6-year-old? You're not going to talk to him about perfection. Of necessity, therefore, his teacher, who has acquired greater perfection than the child loves in a childish way. No, something's wrong here. Something's wrong here. Greater perfection than the child. No. Let's see if I can find this quickly in the Hebrew. Because this is... Yeah. Therefore, he says the teacher was acquired great perfection, will induce the child to learn using the things which the child loves in his childish way. He'll use those as means to get him to learn. Thus the teacher may say, read, and I will give you some nuts or figs. I'll give you a bit of honey. With this stimulation, the child tries to read. He does not work hard for the sake of reading itself, since he does not understand its value. He reads in order to obtain the food. Now notice what's going on here. If you ask the 6-year-old, what's the good of reading? What's he going to say? Oh, you get nuts and honey. That's what it's good for. Because that's what the teacher does. That's why I go. That's why I'm learning to read. Because that way I get nuts and honey. So think for a second. You're really training him in a false picture of what he's doing. He's learning Torah, and he's getting nuts and honey, and he's doing it for the nuts and honey. What you're implying to him implicitly is, that's what Torah is good for, getting nuts and honey. So you're teaching him something by implication which he's going to have to outgrow. And this is a principle in the Rambam's understanding of education across the board, even in the way in which the Torah is written. Many things that are written in the Torah are written as appropriate for a stage in educational development. So, for example, the anthropomorphisms, where God is described in human terms, and especially in physical terms, the Torah does that because for many people at the beginning of their lives, the world is physical, period. The totality of what exists is physical things and physical qualities, nothing else. And if you start off teaching a person about the Torah's view of the world by saying, I'm going to tell you about something which isn't physical in any respect whatsoever, his attitude is, leave me alone. You're making it up. That's silly. There isn't anything like that. I'd rather go water ski. Leave me alone. So the Torah writes in physical terms about HaKadosh Baruch Hu to keep these people in, to reach them in the terms that they understand, even though strictly speaking they're not correct. And at a later stage in their intellectual development, then you reveal to them little by little the truth of what the Torah is trying to teach. This he says in the Mishnah Torah, this he says in the Gemara Nevuchim. There's a theme throughout his life. And here he's saying it here in the comment of the Mishnah. Yeah.
I mean, from the previous opinions that we read, that the Rambam brought, there seems to be like this principle of the childish is being projected into the world to come for all those opinions.
Exactly right. This is an expression of the ideas that you find in our sources that are a compromise with a person's educational immaturity. That's exactly right. These things. So then, as he said, they're taken literally. So some of them are meant to be literally, and some of them are meant as a preliminary, and he'll explain that. And, well, let's go on a little bit, because my oldest son made a very sharp remark here. Maybe I'll get into it in a second. He reads in order to obtain the food. Eating these delicacies is far more important to him than reading, and a greater good to him. Therefore, although he thinks of study as work and effort, he's willing to do it in order to get what he wants, a nut or a piece of candy. As the child grows and his mind improves, what was formerly important to him loses its importance, while other things become precious. You can't motivate an 11-year-old by saying, I'll give you a piece of candy. Well, at least I hope not. Things have changed a little bit. The teacher will stimulate his desire for whatever he wants then. The teacher may say to the child, read and I will give you beautiful shoes or nice clothes. Now the child will apply himself to reading for the sake of new clothes, not for the sake of the study itself. He wants the garments more than the Torah. The coat will be the end, which he hopes to achieve by reading. As his intelligence improves still more, and these things too become unimportant to him, he will set his desire upon something of greater value. Then his teacher may say to him, learn this passage or chapter, and I will give you a dinar or two, money. Again, he will try to read in order to receive the money, since money is more important than the study. The end which he seeks to achieve through his study is to acquire the money which has been promised him. Now the Rambam says, what I told you before, all this is deplorable, because it's making the study of Torah secondary to something else for which he's studying. It's sort of like using the Mona Lisa as a paperweight. A sudden wind blows through the Louvre and all the offices, the papers are blowing on the floor. Somebody says, we got to stop this. Take that picture down and put it on the papers so they won't blow. Just the Mona Lisa, right? Which is supposed to be the most famous painting, the last 500 years, and one of the greatest human art products in the history of the world, and so on. Yeah, but it weighs, doesn't it? Okay, it'll stop the papers from blowing. All is deplorable. However, it is unavoidable because of man's limited insight, as a result of which he makes the goal of wisdom something other than wisdom itself, and assumes that the purpose of study is the acquisition of honor, which makes a mockery of truth. This process of subordinating the learning of Torah to some other goal makes a mockery of truth. And yet, he says, it's necessary. It's unavoidable. From those words, my oldest son, who ran a school for a number of years, said it is forbidden to allow a child to study for its own sake. It's forbidden. Because you don't realize that at his stage of immaturity, it's not really for its own sake. It's getting something else out of it, and something else that it's getting out of it is something you can't control, you have no power over, and you don't know that it will lead step by step to more understanding. And you get kids like 9-year-olds sometimes who seem to be very idealistic and offer to do things, for idealistic purposes. He says, the Rambam is telling you, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. You have to realize the immaturity that's necessarily there. Now, can there be exceptions? There are exceptions to every rule. Rabbi Yochanan said, "En lamedim en haklolos," general statements have exceptions. At least he said that about the rules in the Torah, in the Gemara, so it's not self-refuting. But for the vast majority, don't be taken in by the show of idealism that sometimes some children will give you. It's a big mistake. You have to. They have to get a reward, he said, up to a certain age. I don't know what age it is and how you set the limits, I don't know. But at certain ages where it seems to be jumping ahead of his general maturity, I once, a friend of mine had a child where the age of 8 was really brilliant. And he said brilliant things, so on and so on. And I once saw the child playing in the sandbox. So I said to the father, "Your child is playing in the sandbox?" He said, "Yeah, he's an 8-year-old child." So yeah, he could say brilliant things, but he still enjoyed playing in the sandbox. And that father was smart enough to say, let him play in the sandbox. Don't say, since you could say such smart things, you should be saying smart things all day long. No, because he's an 8-year-old child also, in addition to being smart. So I think that's part of what's going on. Okay, this is an introduction.